TeddyTalks.
Hello and welcome to TeddyTalks After Hours, where we pause, rewind, and unpack each episode. And it's for grown-ups only, so maybe your kiddos have gone off to Nine-Nine Land, or maybe they're at school, but now we can talk straight up with the parents and educators out there listening. So I'm here with Kevin F. Adler, our guest on TeddyTalks, and CEO of Miracle Messages nonprofit. Kevin, in this episode, it was all about housing insecurity and homelessness, which I know is one that is important to you personally. So first, we're going to pause. Why is this topic important to you?
Yeah, it was really fun to do the show. So thanks for having me. My uncle, Mark, was my favorite uncle, remembered every birthday, guest of honor at Thanksgiving, Christmas. He also lived on the streets of Santa Cruz for 30 years. But I never looked at Mark as a homeless man because he was just a beloved member of my family. And so it wasn't until after Mark passed away at the age of 50 that I started thinking, gosh, everyone I'm walking by, that's someone's son or daughter, someone's brother or sister, or some kid's beloved aunt or uncle. And I realized, Rebecca, that my own compassion on this issue was limited. I, at that time, saw people experiencing homelessness not as people to be loved, but as problems to be solved. And the work that I've committed my life to over the last decade at Miracle Messages and now through my book, When We Walk By, is what would it look like to embrace our unhoused neighbors as people to be loved, not as problems to be solved, and seeing people as somebody, as my shirt says.
You took the words out of my mouth. I was going to shout out for anyone who is listen-only mode that Kevin's shirt is delightful. It says, everyone is someone's somebody. And I think that's so great that you shared that story about your uncle, because a lot of times I think we can, kind of just, like you say, walk by and forget that people who are experiencing homelessness are someone's uncle or someone's daughter or someone's best friend. So can we talk a little bit about this episode? I think it was such an important topic. Let's rewind the episode. So in this episode, the Teddy twins learned in your Teddy Talk that there are many different reasons that people become unhoused. Can you just recap some of those reasons that you shared with the Teddy twins?
Yeah, absolutely. I think of homelessness as perhaps the most intersectional issue of our time. So when we think about all the systems in our society that aren't working the way they should, from criminal justice system, income inequality, healthcare, health disparities, the foster care system, racism, discrimination, and housing affordability, of course, all roads can lead to homelessness. And I was really excited in the episode to be able to talk about some of those elements around whether someone can afford a house or rent, whether someone is able to have the capacity to, put in an application and be in that kind of housing market. But I think there's this other element beyond government systems that we have to talk about, and that's the aspects about our shared humanity. Do we see people experiencing homelessness as neighbors experiencing homelessness? Or really front and center, are they the homeless, or seeing them as problems to be solved? So I think the other aspect to homelessness that often doesn't get talked about is elements like isolation, loneliness, disconnectedness, what we call at Miracle Messages, relational poverty as a form of poverty, stigma and shame, stereotypes of who those people are and kind of us versus them language, paternalism, certainly within the care system, where we assume we know what's better for them and their families, what they need, which has been disproven time and time again through basic income pilots and other programs that put dignity at the front and center. And even aspects like the hyper individualism in our society, where if you look at each other and have a notion of like a self-made man or woman, you've pulled yourself up by your bootstraps, you're successful. Well, if someone is experiencing homelessness, does that mean that they're self-failed as an individual? Are they deservedly poor? And I think most, of our listeners, most people who hear that would shudder. And I know it's just, it's kind of hard to think about, But that is a notion that I think we have to get past, is seeing our neighbors experiencing homelessness as they've done something to deserve their situation. So in the book that I wrote, really tried to center the systems that are broken as well as the humanity aspects that are broken. But I think if we understand both of those and how they work together, there's actually an optimistic silver lining. Because if we're part of the problem, we have to be part of the solution too. And so really through the work that we've done at Miracle Messages, seeing everyday people get involved in helping our unhoused neighbors reunite with their long lost loved ones, or having a friend to talk to when they have no one else through a phone buddy system, or giving money directly through a basic income. We've been able to see lives transformed, and that gives me more hope than 10 years ago when I started this work. I feel more hopeful and optimistic on this issue, but it's going to take a lot of work from all of us to really end homelessness in our lifetime.
You really laid out the complexity of this intersectionality of homelessness and what the causes and the roots. And I think, as a parent myself, and you and I are both in the San Francisco Bay Area, and it is a visible community in which, I went to UC Berkeley, and, there's a lot of tent cities and things like that. And when my kids ask, why is that person not have a house? I think that sometimes parents, and myself included, can oversimplify things, right? Like I've heard, oh, well, they've just made a series of bad choices and led them to, or they're on drugs, or like we can sort of give like a reason. But humans are complex, aren't they, Kevin? Like we don't have just one reason we are who we are today. It's not one thing that has happened, or and we also presume that we know. We don't always know the stories behind how people came to be where they are, just like no one knows our stories. So what I loved about your the way you explained it to the Teddy twins is the language you used. So you actually acknowledged their curiosity, and you gave not definitive answers like they are homeless because of this. You said, well, it could be this or that or the other. And I think that helps the kids out there listening understand the complexity. Can you also share something that I think was really important as we were writing this episode, is the language we use with kids about people experiencing homelessness? And I think I've heard a change in the vernacular from like homeless to unhoused, or people experiencing homelessness. Can you share a little for parents and educators out there why that's important?
Yeah, it's a great question. So when we think about vernacular, it's not about any kind of purity test or any kind of litmus test and trying to always get language precisely right. It can be imperfect and difficult. But I think what is important is to get past this monolith of the homeless, that we have grouped, a mother with a child who is escaping a domestic violence situation, someone who has a severe mental health issue or substance abuse issue that's untreated, an LGBTQ young person who is escaping an unsafe home environment, someone who's lost their job, someone who had a loved one passed away, someone who has a health issue that, they couldn't afford. There's so many paths into homelessness, and yet the language and the identification is almost this one size fits all other, the homeless. But we would never look at each other as housed people. It's just a almost meaningless identity given the complexity of who we are and the human experience. We have housing. I'm incredibly grateful to not have experienced homelessness myself. But I think we have to stop defining people by what they're lacking. And again, if a housed person sounds ridiculous and silly, homeless is even worse because you don't have housing. Your identity is wrapped up in something you lack, and seeing them as someone's son or daughter, someone's brother or sister, someone's somebody. And I think a way to do that doesn't totally miss the importance of housing as part of the equation is to say a person experiencing homelessness or an unhoused neighbor, to use person-centric language.
Yeah, I mean, Grizzle wasn't far off. It does cost a gazillion, trillion dollars to live in the Bay Area. Like, it really is. A lot of parts of the country are very, very expensive to live in, but we don't want to reduce people just to their identity around whether or not they have a home or not. And when you put it like that, it does really make it very crystal clear. So the next part of our post-game analysis is really rewinding and reflecting. So I'd love for you to think back, like when you were younger, maybe when you were a young kid, and you were seeing your uncle in Santa Cruz. And let's rewind. Like, what do you wish your younger self knew about this topic?
I think with my uncle, I never really saw the experience of him homeless. He was really just at the Thanksgiving, Christmas dinner table. And I didn't feel that there was much space within my family to ask questions about what his life was like when we dropped him off at the Greyhound station, or when we drove him back to Santa Cruz, or when he called 1-800-COLLECT. I almost said 1-800-MISS-YOU, our hotline number, but when he called us and asked for $50 to speak to my dad. When I started this work, after my uncle passed away, I started thinking, everyone I'm walking by is someone's son or daughter. I didn't know how to make a difference. I didn't know how to get involved. And so for a year, I did this storytelling project where I invited a couple dozen unhoused neighbors to wear cameras around their chests and narrate their experience of what life is like on the streets for an hour or two at a time. And there were two key insights that came from that. First is what really set the foundation for Miracle Messages, which is someone said, I never realized I was homeless when I lost my housing, only when I lost my family and friends. And that was kind of the insight around what we come to call relational poverty. But I think for just the purpose of this conversation, the second insight might be even more important to center here. Every single time you'd see a kid walk by in front of the person, the kid tugs, grabs, points, asks questions, stares, starts walking towards, and you'd almost see the parent half the time drag them away, scold them, say, no, dangerous, bad, that's impolite, don't do that. But then half the time you'd see the kid almost guide the parent to the person experiencing homelessness. And maybe they'd have a conversation or give, some kind of, care item or a few dollars. And I've thought a lot about what is it that we knew intrinsically as little ones that we seem to have forgotten about basic humanity, right and wrong, and not really being totally, just used to this status quo that's not acceptable, where people are living and dying on the streets. So I was a pretty precocious kid. I don't think I was the one who was constantly tugging at parents' sleeve and asking hard questions. But I think a lot of our young listeners and audience members are asking questions and are thinking about it in a way that maybe we as adults could learn from. So in the work that we do, we've really valued getting close to our unhoused neighbors, but really trying to remember aspects of our own humanity that by looking down on someone and not seeing their humanity, we almost dehumanize ourselves in the process. And the last thing I'll just mention on this is there was, as a psychologist, and you might appreciate this, there was a study that was done by neuroscientists at Princeton and Duke. And they found that the part of our brain that activates when we see a person compared to, say, an inanimate object, the medial prefrontal cortex, that part of the brain has been found not to activate when we see someone that we perceive in an extreme outgroup in our society, and that includes people experiencing homelessness. And the implications of that was about 10 years ago, the New York City Rescue Mission did an experiment where they had individuals who were dressed up to look homeless sit down on the street as members of their very own families walked by. And in iteration after iteration of this experiment, not a single person recognized their own mom or dad, brother or sister, son or daughter, or husband and wife on the direct path they were walking. And so a question that I've often wrestled with, and I invite, audience members to reflect on, is would you recognize your loved one if you were walking by? And the likelihood is no, you probably wouldn't, unless you really are taking time to think and proactively reflect on these issues of our humanity. So.
Wow. I think that's so poignant what you just shared. And kids, one of the whole reasons we started Teddy Talks is because kids are naturally curious. And when we as adults don't have language to answer their big questions, we can sometimes shut it down, right? And just give a very short answer. And so hopefully those listening have gotten some language that they can use with their children when they do ask about why is that person homeless, what happened, because we can really dehumanize folks if we just shut down kids' questions and their natural curiosity. So as we mentioned in the episode, we ask and wonder, and listen to each other. And I'm really glad that you shared that story with me and that really compelling research. So let's unpack this just a little further for parents, teachers, other Teddy Talk listeners out there. So at Teddy Talks, our motto is we have big ideas for little ears. So we have a lot of big ear listeners out there. What is one thing, a sort of take-home message that you want these big ear listeners out there to know about how to talk to their kids about homelessness?
Well, other than needing to re-listen to the episode to try to catch all the puns that are totally went over my head the first time. I was wondering about the ideas, but now you got me. I don't think there's any wrong question on this issue. I think it's a really hard, complicated issue that also has some simple elements around humanity, right and wrong. So one of the most common questions I get from adults, which I think gets to the heart of the question, is I don't know what to say to someone who's experiencing homelessness. What do I say? I'm feeling nervous. I'm afraid. I don't know what to do. And I often just take a moment to then ask a question in response. Well, why do you feel nervous? Why do you feel afraid? Why do you feel like you don't know what to do? And I think taking time to truly unpack the emotions and the feelings that come up on this issue is a great starting point. A young person walked by an unhoused neighbor, having a conversation about that afterwards, what they thought about, what questions do they have on this. And I also think that change can really happen through relationships and direct interaction. There's been times where a young person has come to one of our events. We'll do like a gathering in San Francisco, some of our other cities, and they'll be so touched by hearing a story of a person experiencing homelessness. They'll come up and tug on my shirt sleeve and say, I'd like to give you my allowance money, and hand me $7. I think our youngest members of our society are really the ones who we have to listen to and just really act as guides, facilitators, encouragers, to try to invite them to say that these are important questions, that in fact, as mommies and daddies and adults, we sometimes forget to ask. But I think if there's opportunities where the young person is able in a safe, respectful, appropriate, age-appropriate way to have a conversation or interaction with a neighbor experiencing homelessness. Homelessness is not just what we see as homelessness. There's a large, quiet majority of people who are experiencing homelessness who look a lot like you and me. You couldn't identify that that's a person experiencing homelessness. Half the people who are at shelters have jobs. Oftentimes people are sleeping in their cars or doubled up, tripled up with friends. Young people experiencing homelessness are one of the largest and fastest growing groups of unhoused individuals in the country. So in all likelihood, as our young ones enter school system, they'll know someone who's experiencing homelessness, even if they don't know that that person's experiencing homelessness. So I think just being able to take time to unpack that homelessness isn't just one thing. It's not just a person in a tent or panhandling on the streets, as worthy of our humanity and our heart as that person is, but it's also someone who may be present at a soup kitchen or a shelter or another kind of service program. And perhaps there's an opportunity to go with your child to a setting like that, to have a conversation, to get to know each other, and just really then to have a conversation afterwards about what came up. So I think exposure, interaction, relationships, and having very open conversations is really what I'd encourage.
Thank you so much for that. And can you shout out your website so that if folks want to learn more about Miracle Messages, they can do so?
Yeah, absolutely. So folks are interested in getting involved as volunteers, learning more about our work, watching some of our videos, they can go to miraclemessages.org. And then if folks are interested in getting a copy of my book and reading more about what I wish I learned over the last 10 years, what I wish I knew 10 years ago when I started this journey, they can go to whenwewalkby.com. And there's links on both sites to the other, so you can find one either way.
Thank you so much. So we like to end all of our Teddy Talks after hours with a, here comes your pun, very big bonus question. So for those people who are tuning in, maybe for the first time, Grizzlette was my actual childhood bear. Here she is. Grizzle was my sister's bear, and we used to talk it out and play it out together, which is exactly what we do here on Teddy Talks. So do you remember having a favorite bear or item from childhood? Tell us a story.
Do you mean I had a chance to give Mr. Bear his 15 minutes of fame today and I did not bring him?
Oh,
This is a
missed
travesty,
opportunity.
and I will be taking a photo and expecting that to be in the credits somewhere. Mr. Bear, I have had him since I was born, and he was a gift from my Uncle Emery, so my grandpa's brother, Uncle Emery. And the thing that I loved about Mr. Bear is he had a voice box, a recording voice box in his bear behind. I don't know the best way to say
Get
that.
it?
Get
Bear behind.
it? Bear behind. You know,
Did it again.
I might be a regular here. And you could, by pressing a button on Mr. Bear, you could record your voice and then play it back, and it would be your voice playing back. And I used to just spend hours and hours recording little things, and it was just this magical experience of, maybe even one of my first relationships between this teddy bear, and then I could record, whatever I'm saying, and he speaks back to me. So I still have Mr. Bear, and he has ridden in the pilot seat on my bed or off to the side on a couple large pillows that my wife has brought into our lives that I still don't know the purpose of those pillows, but he hangs out and he is my stuffed animal. And God forbid, in the event of a fire or something like that, he's one of the first items and only items I'd be grabbing. He means a lot to me. So that's Mr. Bear.
If the voice box still works, I need a recording of Mr. Bear saying, "Join me on Teddy Talks," or wherever you get your podcasts. Can you make that happen?
I will consult with Mr. Bear. It's been a few decades since since he's reserving his voice, maybe for this moment. But I'll have a talk with him, and I'm sure he'll share a photo at the very least.
Fantastic. So as his official agent, we hope to see him on the show next time. Thank you so much, Kevin, for joining us and for sharing your wisdom and the humanity of the work you do. I know that I have been very touched by your message, and I hope folks out there have been as well. So thank you so much, and we'll see all the rest of you all on the next episode of Teddy Talks.
Teddy Talks, Teddy Talks, Teddy Talks, Teddy Talks.